Well, our next Footy on 9 season preview is Essendon, and a really intriguing one. Matthew Lloyd joins us again. Lloyd, your club. It could be interesting to see what we see from the Bombers this year.
They've had so much hype over previous years. This will be the first year that they've come in with none, really. People would expect them to top 4 premiers. Big predictions in for 2018, 2019. This year, there's not those predictions. I think everyone's really unsure of what the Bombers are capable of, and that's fair enough because their best is really good, and their worst is pretty bad.
Let's take a look at their ins and outs from the trade period. It was a relatively quiet trade period for the Bombers compared to seasons past, but Andrew Phillips, a guy who might play a bit of footy this year with their ruck stocks quite thin. Tom Cutler adds something on the outside. They've delisted Mitch Brown, which is an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, Mitch Brown was very unlucky, I would have thought, but still, he's a number 3, 4, 5 forward, so it shouldn't hurt them too much. Phillips, was probably a very good recruit in the end with what's happened with Tommy Bell-Chambers and his knee injury over the break, and Tom's coming to the end of his career. It's a bit of a worry. Phillips has been a number 2 ruckman wherever he's gone, but he's going to have to hold up in the ruck, against some quality ruckmen early in the season. So, but for depth-wise, it was a good recruit.
Before we get stuck right into them, their draftees, no really early picks for the Bombers. You wouldn't think these guys had played too much footy early in the season.
With Essendon, they should be in the premiership window. They should be, because they've traded away all their early draft picks. We saw this year their first pick was Harrison Jones at pick 30, but you look at Dylan Shield, Devon Smith, Jake Stringer, Adam Sard, the list goes on. They've given away draft picks, so you think that means that they feel they're ready to win a premiership, and to see that they haven't won a final now for 15 or 16 years. They lost the final badly. I was pretty disappointed in the way they lost to the West Coast Eagles last year. They gave up 4 goals, 8 or something in the first quarter. Just that streaming out of defence, it just doesn't stack up and doesn't win you big games of football. So the big thing for me is what Ben Rutten and Blake Carousella have brought to the table from a game style perspective. I want to turn up every week and say Essendon will be in games week after week because they have a system, not relying on individual talent like they have for many years with Sard, McKenna running off half-back, needing Joey to kick a bag of 5 goals. That's the big question we all have on Essendon. You can bring Devon Smith back and all that, but it means nothing if you haven't got a sound game plan.
Well, one of the biggest talking points of the off-season, perhaps the biggest story of the trade period, was Joe Daniher. His recovery's still been quite slow. How do you view that non-trade now, knowing that he's still a long way away from playing footy?
Yeah, I didn't mind the fact that they made him stick to it, because I feel too many players break contracts. So could you imagine a forward line? Well, they're not going to have Joey there, but James Stewart, Sean McKernan, these type of players, and then you've got Stringer, number 3. That's not going to scare anybody. So that's the real concern for Essendon. That how do you kick a winning score? Stringer's pretty much the number 1. McKernan and James Stewart are going to have to be the best tall forward, but they're not that. So how do they manufacture goals? Does Cale Hooker have to go back to the forward line with Michael Hurley holding down defence? So Aaron Francis coming through. So there's so many question marks on Essendon at the moment, and only 24, 25 players completed a pre-season, pre-Christmas. So on Daniher, I think at the first half of the year is a write-off. If they can get some footy out of him, and by the end of the year he starts to go well, that's the biggest bonus, because if you miss the pre-season, you're up against it from day one.
You've done a lot of work with him over the year with Joe, particularly on his goal kicking, but where do you think his head will be at now?
Players are pretty good, to be honest. They understand it's, the system, and that once you walk back in, that you commit back to your footy club and the players. But the worry for Joe is rehab's a very lonely place, and it's not as if he can get out there and play. My brother Brad was Fremantle's recruiter for a long time. He used to say the best thing for recruits you take from Victoria to Freo is they get games early, and it makes them happy. Whereas Joe Daniher is going to be sitting on a treadmill, on the grinder or on the bike, and you're often alone, and you start thinking about the Sydney Swans. So for Essendon's sake, let's hope he gets some games late in the year and plays well to hopefully keep him following that year.
You touched on the number of guys that had been recovering from off-season surgery, and we saw what impact that had at Melbourne last year. I mean, it really does affect the start of your year, doesn't it?
You're spot on with that. I think that not being able to get the work into them is critical. You start the season slowly. You can't really work on your game plan like you would like because you haven't got your key players out there. So, I'm a little bit concerned about that because of the lack of work a lot of Bomber players have got into them.
In terms of the midfield, there's a lot of, on paper, there's a lot of big names there, but I guess the midfield is probably the area that's been the greatest concern. When the going's got tough, they haven't found a way to really stem the tide in there, have they?
No, they haven't. Dylan Shiel, I thought, was going to be the answer for them, and despite finishing second in the best and fairest, he was very outside. I wanted them to target Ollie Wines over the off-season because I thought he's the exact type of player that they need. Devon Smith does return, but he's not a number one midfielder. He's not a Dangerfield or Fife. You can't match it with those sort of players. He's just not big enough. So I still think that's their biggest weakness. Despite Daniher is going to be a weakness because he's not there, but having a cream inside midfielder, Heppel's slowed up. Can Heppel get back to the player he once was? I think his body's let him down. He's ageing a little bit, so he's slowed up. So Merritt was interesting, being left out of the leadership group, being their best player last year. So I think Merritt's their best footballer, but still he's lightly framed. So it's David Myers, they kept trying, but he's retired now and wasn't the answer. So I still think that's a big weakness for the Bombers.
The leadership group's an interesting one, isn't it? The year before it was Hurley and Hooker who got overlooked, and I guess we heard stories that they might have been a little bit upset by that. This year it was Zach Merritt. How does he respond to that? He seems like a guy who'll take that on the chin. Yeah,
he said that. I hope he got the feedback of why. I'm sure he would have, and hopefully he can be an even better player and more rounded person off field because of it. But that's the thing about Essendon. It's a lack of consistency on the field, and they've lacked the consistency off field. And then the big question mark is the consistency in the coach's box. Rutten and obviously John Worsfold, Caracella. Who calls the shots? There's a decision to be made. Does Rutten do it? Does he have to go off John Worsfold? Will John sit on the bench? Will he sit in the box? I just hope Rutten can really take the reins with Caracella. John's there as a mentor to help through the week. It's a big job managing a lot of staff, all your players, all your sponsors. So I think John Worsfold will be brilliant for that. But I really hope to bring the Richmond. What Caracella can bring from Richmond as well can really help the Bombers this year.
Well, we know that Richmond style stacks up in finals, and that's been a real issue for Essendon. It's been talked about the time since they've won a final over 5,000 days or something like that now. Is that hoodoo real? Does it hang over the club, do you think?
Most players wouldn't think of it because they weren't there. They've only been there for 4 or 5 years, most of them. Hurley's been there for 10 though, so it'd play on his mind a little bit. Cale Hooker. They're desperate to be part of a winning final, so they're the guys that need to drive it. You're only as good as your senior players, and it was interesting that they've gone back to Zaharakis and Hurley and these guys, and it's now on them really to drive the standards hard for the Bombers to understand what they're missing out on. These players don't understand what it means to play in big finals, and I hope they get the opportunity, and whether it's this year, that's a big question mark.
Let's get to your predictions for season 2020. Pressure is on plenty of players, but who's it on the most at Essendon?
I think Adam Sard is the man that can be under a lot of pressure. I think Connor McKenna, we all hope is back fit and firing at the Bombers. I think he's a super player for Essendon, and I think Sard, the attention's going to come on him. They understand the weapon he is, and that's a big test of a footballer. When you have a breakout year like Sard has had, can you back it up for another year in a row?
Who's going to be the big improver?
I love Andrew McGrath as a footballer. I know people might say he's a number one draft pick, but I think he can knock on the door of an All-Australian mix at the end of this year, and I think he could possibly be the captain in the next 3-4 years of the Essendon Football Club. That's how highly I rate him.
Well, this is the intriguing one for me. Top 4 ambitions last year, bombed out in the first week of the finals. A lot of injuries this year. What can we expect in terms of where Essendon finishes?
I think because of the poor pre-season and the doubts around too many players, particularly their front end and that midfield issue that they've got, I think 9th. They'll just miss out on the finals, and another year goes by without winning one.
Well, big call, Lloydie. Thanks again for your time. For more, wideworldofsports.com.au or 9 Now for Footy on 9's season preview.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you.